Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have here with me Vice Admiral Anup Singh, who's helped me a lot to understand, of course, one, the Chinese Navy, the Chinese maritime plans, and of course, Indian maritime security, Indian maritime reach as well. I'd like to take the audience back to one of my first conversations with the Admiral, where he explained to us the reach of the Indian maritime security zone. At that time, when he told me that it's going to be from the westernmost part of Africa right across to the Sea of Japan, that's something I found a little hard to believe. But today, sir, has been proven right. And no better person to tell us the significance of this. Thank you, sir, for coming to the show once again and helping us to understand the latest moves that we've made in terms of maritime security, in terms of India's maritime reach.
Always a pleasure, Adi. Thank you.
Sir, we did see the deal of Haifa. A lot was spoken about it. People said, uh, this is going to be basically uh, an outreach towards the Atlantic. We'll be able to reach that side. This is a NATO repair base, so there's a lot of significance with regards that. A whole lot of things that came out there. Firstly, may I request you to dwell a little further because time has passed. Things have opened out a little further. We probably have a little more idea about Haifa itself before we get into the Egyptian deal and the port in Oman and a whole lot of other things that are happening.
Well, first of all, um, by sheer coincidence, I happened to have visited Haifa port in 2006 when I was the fleet commander, Western Fleet, and four of my ships were taken for overseas deployment to Haifa, followed by Izmir in Turkey, followed by Athens in Greece. And we did exercises en route, and of course, in these ports, had interaction with their respective navies. And at that time, Haifa, other than the fact that it is the most strategically important port, not only in Israel, but in Eastern Mediterranean, and in the proximity of the Suez Canal, um, the fact that uh, north of Israel was Lebanon, which has been a hotspot because of what is that terrorist organization's name? I'm forgetting.
PLA and all these guys, right, sir? The PLO,
Hezbollah,
Hezbollah.
and who were responsible for having kidnapped two Israeli soldiers from across the border. And by the time I was coming back through the Suez Canal after 1 month of overseas deployment, I was asked to turn back and evacuate Indians from Beirut, which was just north of Israel. But that apart, Haifa port at that time wasn't that impressive as it is now. Um, but perhaps it had become a little unwieldy for management of port and had become a loss-making entity by 2010,
Hmm.
which was very surprising. Um, so in 2011, Benjamin Netanyahu had appointed a committee. I think it is called the Trachtenberg Committee or whatever, and to go into the reasons why their ports are not doing well and what should be done. And by in another 2 years after that committee's report, by 2012, he had given orders for expanding Haifa port with a new port called I think the Gulf port. Yet it did not do too well, and the Chinese were eyeing this port for quite some time. So we've done an honorable coup with Adani having acquired this port. A, because it will be turned into a solid profit making venture. B, the landlord port model, which India has been observing for its major ports for many years now, that government of India is the landlord, And because most of the major ports were not doing too well, we started calling Port of Singapore Authority PSA or Dubai Port Worlds um, and some other companies, particularly Dubai Port Worlds and PSA, who are masters in managing ports with modern infrastructure and for container handling. Now we've come of age. Ever since Adani made that port in Gujarat, the Adani port, SEZ as an Adani port itself, at Mudra, uh, we've seen what modern ports must look like and act like. Major ports, as you know, are government entities and they've been there since British times. Uh, Other than Tuticorin and Ennore, all of them predate independence. And the procedures and the unions and the amount of manpower and the everything is Stone Age. And that's why they don't do too well. So therefore, we started offloading, saying we are the landlord, government is a landlord, and two wharfs in, let us say, Jawaharlal Nehru Port, which was a modern port post-independence, and it was commissioned in 1980 or 81, were offloaded to Dubai Port World. They started doing very well. They were container handling wharfs. And then we expanded, and one of the most critical ports used to be the Ernakulam port in Kochi. Once its wharves were handed over for management of containers, of container handling to Dubai Port World or one other company, they started generating greater revenue than any other port in India.
Wow.
This is the model that Mudra started his own port on. He did not hand over to Dubai Port World. He is himself. Mudra port itself, the Adani ports itself is as if it is a master of Dubai port or Port of Singapore Authority, etc. In efficiency and in management techniques. So it has been doing these not mergers and acquisitions, but takeovers and providing its services to many other areas as well. So firstly, it is an Indian takeover. It is guaranteed to make profits, whereas earlier Haifa port was not doing well. Secondly, I'm certain it is going to create an SEZ of its own in Haifa. It has already, when Adani took over, his company announced it, I think, in May this year, that he'd set aside one parcel of the land in the port as an incubation center, invited Indian entrepreneurs and startup guys to come and set up whatever they want to set up. So it's going to be wider than just an SEZ, not bigger in size. Next, Benjamin Netanyahu, when he had taken the decision to offload, he himself had said that it will ease exit and entry, that means import and export, for going to Europe, bypassing the Arabian Peninsula, and will improve efficiencies to a level that the government doesn't have to bother, the port authority doesn't have to bother. But finally, imagine that you have management of a strategically located port well beyond the Indian Ocean into the Mediterranean and well beyond our backwaters. That means you're expanding your footprint for reasons that are strategic for both Israel and India. We are not like the Chinese. We are not making Belt Road initiatives or Eurasian corridors, nor are we creating dependencies. And that's why the new world order, which has started after 2009, because 2009 is the time that the 9-dash line was reiterated and widely circulated by China, and it became more aggressive than ever before. The new world order is started respecting India wherever it is making its forays and honest ventures and honest takeovers. Because today, China is known to control through either mergers or management contracts or takeovers 99 important ports across the world. And you will be amazed that some of these ports are in all choke points or near choke points. So you can imagine what kind of strategy China was spearheading and the world was sleeping over. I mean, they've gone all the way to Belgium to take over Zeebrugge port, which was one of the most important ports. And
Yep.
years ago, the French found that one of the largest ports on the Normandy coast, Le Havre, not far from Paris, was unmanageable economically. So the Chinese went and took over part of Le Havre port almost 14 years ago. When you take over management of a port, even if it is not your manpower, the government and the locals are losing control over what may happen in the future.
Future.
Just like Hambantota Tota has gone for 99 years, no court, no international court will be able to intervene in favor of Sri Lanka because they've signed on the dotted line for 99
Yeah.
years for
Yeah.
peanuts, $1.12 billion for 99 years. Now, you may say that we signed on the dotted line at Sri Lankans that we will, it will not be used. Chinese have signed on the agreement that it will not be used for military purposes. Who's there to check the Chinese? And I'm just waiting to see some submarine or some, not just Huang 7, some submarine or some warship coming over there, like they did in the Colombo International Container Terminal
Yep.
in the month of commissioning. A conventional submarine for the first time with a submarine tender, a depot ship. They berthed in September 2014 and again in November 2014. In between, the submarine went around the Indian Ocean. Because a conventional submarine cannot sustain itself for longer patrols unlike a nuclear submarine.
Nuclear. Yeah.
It has to come up earlier and do R&R for its crew and also do replenishment. So everybody knows that India has not had that habit for centuries. A, B, Indian business houses as well as the Indian government's own ventures are very honorably complied. They are very honorably comply with the dotted line, the signatures on the dotted line. So much so that GMR went into Maldives, and when the government that has thankfully now been removed a couple of years ago was too close to Beijing, it invited the Chinese and told the GMR, contract or no contract, you can get out now.
Get out. Yeah.
So GMR went out after doing so much work. So therefore, it is very good that India has finally made a foray into Israel. And the defense cooperation and other aspects of strategic partnership between Israel and India that are ongoing, some classified, some not classified, most of them not classified. Therefore, creating a footprint in a port which is strategically located is a great move on our part.
Amazing, sir. Sir, I want to ask you about, Prime Minister Modi recently came back from, excuse me, Egypt, and
Yes.
of course these rumors were there right at the time when the Haifa port was also done that, oh, Suez we're getting some space, there will be some either a management thing which will happen or something like that. But there is more reality, more. I won't say reality. The more details have kind of propped up out, wherein actually the Egyptians are, planning to award us certain segments of the Suez for certain amount of management and maintenance, along with an SEZ area right next to the Suez Canal. Now, to me as a layman, sir, this is like entering the Suez Canal. You've got some space right there, and as you exit, turn right, and you've got Haifa right there.
Yes.
What is the significance and what is the importance of pre the Suez Canal, and how do these two ports kind of these two areas, these two operations kind of link together?
The two countries that must be holding India in awe would be France and UK, insofar as the Suez Canal is concerned.
The
You very rightly
1959 war.
pointed out. Very rightly pointed out that you get out of the Suez and northwards, and you
Yeah,
are next to Haifa. The distance just 235 nautical
yeah.
miles, which is less than 24 hours of sailing on economical speed. So that's why I said strategically located. The Suez SEZ that was announced, the Suez SEZ, which was, I think, commissioned in 2015 and 21, they had a new law concerning the Egyptians had a new law on the SEZ. Is one of the latest and most modern SEZs, and it is on a very large parcel of land near Port Suez, not near Port Said. And India has been offered in this bilateral that took place between the two leaders, large part of the SEZ for creating whatever we want to set up. And so far as the Suez is concerned, um, I said that we must be held in awe by those two countries. It's a fact because the Suez Canal Authority is a money spinner for Egypt. And one has always got worried if an evergreen ship carrying 15,000 containers came at right angles and got ran aground in the middle of Suez, shutting it down for 7 days,
Yeah.
costing the global economy $45 billion. And people were hoping that that the ship doesn't get stuck for a month, because that would have meant every ship of every size having to go around the Cape of Good Hope, 20,000 miles extra and 20 days extra. So, uh, full details of that part is yet to come, and therefore I will only say that that's a great um, that's been a great outcome of our partnership, strategic partnership with Egypt, between Al Sisi and the Prime Minister.
Sir, how do you see the factor that the Chinese were bidding for both these ports? I mean, of course, France and England are twisting their thumbs. Fair enough. They don't have the capacity or the monetary capacity, and there's a whole lot of things today not there with this thing. But how do you see the Chinese who had actively bid for the Haifa, uh,
Yeah,
who were also actively bidding for this special economic zone right next to the Suez?
there are two reasons. Firstly, the most of the West Asian countries, other than the petrodollar winners inside the Persian Gulf,
Hmm.
even they have got very alarmed with the fast pace at which China has been trying to set up facilities and set up infrastructure. Even though those countries are very rich, they don't need doles and checkbook diplomacy of China. For example, Qatar, most of its sports infrastructure for the FIFA World Games over the last 10 years were built by Chinese firms,
Yeah.
where Qatar, in fact, must have paid advances rather than trying to borrow money from China, because it's one of the richest countries around. But the rest of West Asia and North Africa and East Africa have got very chary of Chinese intent. You imagine a railway line as part of the Belt Road Initiative, and actually the initial contract was signed between China and landlocked Ethiopia before it started implementing BRI. That train for 150 odd kilometer, 135 or 150 kilometers only, carrying goods between Ethiopian railheads and Djibouti, which is the only outlet for Ethiopia because it is landlocked, was said to have cost $4 billion about 10 years ago. Who's going to pay? 135 kilometers. Now, while China is supposed to be the lowest tender in trying to make golf sets to aircraft to military hardware around the world, when it comes to BRI projects, it's billions and billions and billions. And people are so naive, governments who have fallen prey to the Chinese intent of checkbook diplomacy, it's so naive.
Yeah.
They know there are no free lunches, but they want their time to pass with lots of luxury. I don't know how much of that has gone where. That they have fallen real prey, and now there is no way for extraction. So that is something that has alarmed West Asia, including Egypt and particularly Israel. Israel did not have any problems with money, but it was under a lot of pressure from the Americans when the Chinese, in fact, in the 80s and 90s, they were under most American pressure when there were deals on technology of Patriot missile with the Chinese, which was stupid. There were deals on the Harpy drones by the Israelis sold to the Chinese, and that's how the Chinese must have made their drones.
Yep.
And there were some other deals in defense and security. So the Americans were saying, "Are you stupid?" And the Americans indirectly even told the Israelis that all those economic packages and defense and security packages in terms of dollars that are coming to you will stop coming
Yeah.
if this goes on. So when the Haifa port thing was on, firstly, there was that pressure. Secondly, the Israelis suddenly realized, first of all, it is not just the French who are facing riots these days, but in Israel, there have been riots for various reasons
Yep.
for over the last 15 years, various reasons. And their social networking and coming on the streets is so active and so harassing the government that no government can survive unless they go with what the small population of Israel wants. So there is also public pressure to say why are we going to a country which is not reliable, which is not dependable, and which does not have honorable intent. When Israel is one of the few countries that innovates before the rest of the world, whether it is in medical sciences or in environmental protection or whatever else. So these are the reasons that the Chinese were really into Haifa.
I mean, that's the whole thing, and the kind of recrimination I saw in the Chinese media. I still remember. I think it was in Xinhua, or yeah, Xinhua. They, I mean, they were they were like, what will these damn Indians do with a port? I mean, they don't even know how to make a port in their own country. What will they make here? This, that, oh, all sorts of things they said, which is very interesting to me. That actually told me that they've kind of taken it to heart, and damn good.
Yes.
Kudos. Let's come towards the eastern coast of Africa. So this was unexpected. Now, how does this connect with the deal with Oman? How does this connect with Djibouti? Does it connect with Djibouti, sir? Right in the beginning, I'd like to ask you. And how does it actually enhance your presence within uh, the edge of the Indo-Pacific, as it's being called today? It's the westernmost edge of Indo-Pacific as we see it. Uh, Lastly, about again, taking up a port on this particular side of Africa is very interesting, because you also have a lot of trade actually happening from there recently, beginning post the African Union coming into force. there's a bit of a development in that aspect of it. So how do you kind of knit all of these things together and help us understand what's happening here, sir?
When Dukum port was still under construction,
Yes, sir.
there was a lot of news on China having brought in its own industries,
Yeah,
infrastructure
yeah,
building,
yeah.
and offered money in lieu of rights to use certain valves, etc.
Hmm.
Um, India had been raising alarm with Oman, and Oman and India have had a great relationship, great civilizational bonds. The first Indians to land anywhere in the Persian Gulf were there. Well,
Yes, sir.
happens to be just outside the Persian Gulf, this part, Dukum, etc. But most importantly, it is directly opposite Djibouti. Well, diagonally opposite, not directly
Hmm.
opposite. And since it is a new port, which was which was at that time still under construction, when the Chinese came in,
Yes, sir.
we had got very alarmed. And at that time itself, we had raised objections as well as said that whatever help you need, we can provide. There wasn't much movement at that time. Now the Omanis themselves must have got very alarmed at the way things are going on wherever China has gone. In fact, you'll recall that the Queen Elizabeth II, the, the QE2 aircraft carrier, which came into um, the Indian Ocean for the first time after commissioning, first went into Dukum, and they announced that they have a MOU signed with the Omani government on use of one particular berth, because so there were a lot of unintended humor also in the newspapers to say on the net to say British who withdrew from the east of Suez for reasons economic in 1969 onwards we have finally found the pounds to come back and hire some berths. And what is the size of the Royal Navy today? It is hardly anything. These two carriers that they built have also drenched their economy because they've built them at a huge cost. And the second one is not, the Prince of Wales has not been fully operational because they haven't put in all the aircraft that they could have. So the main reason for the British to have sent that carrier over here and thereafter gone into the South China Sea was also to pinprick the Chinese, but at the same time to do what the rest of the world should be doing to China. So you can't be trying to claim rights wherever you go just with your checkbook, whether it is Oman or elsewhere. So simultaneously at that time, I'm sure at that time backdoor consultations must have taken place with America and with UK on what should be done. And the SEZ in Dukum, as you know, is the second largest in the world. It's 2,000 square kilometers of area, real estate. In that, we've the NSA's visit was for obvious reasons. More importantly, for Dukum port, and we have had uh, something like the MOUs with many countries, most of them in Africa and West Asia, where these MOUs lay down that whenever Indian naval vessels require an operational turnaround during overseas deployments, we may need expeditious diplomatic clearance. And it's all peaceful patrolling and flag showing. So this is with Oman as well. And we, even during the anti-piracy patrols, which started off in August 2008 from our country and December 2008 from China, we have doubled down on those, on using Salalah as well as Muscat, particularly Salalah, which was closer to the Gulf of Aden. For Muscat, you had to go a little inside for operational turnaround, which meant You go in for 24 to 48 hours to refuel and to take in fresh rations. And that period is also sufficient for rest and recuperation for the fatigued crew. Uh, Now we have done this deal, which was going on for quite some time, on Dukum as well, because it is not only strategically located where it is one of the most modern, but more importantly, because China was making forays to create rights for itself and nobody else. I mean, if it said that we will build, we will put in money, we will bring our infrastructure, and we will have, in return, we will request you for so much usage in the year of so many valves. The intended reason was very obvious. The purpose was very obvious. So we are an Indian Ocean power. China is not. We are a resident power in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
All countries over here depend upon India and Indian Navy for everything from HADR during natural disasters to any other requirement as a third country intervention, for which has happened in one or two countries like Maldives, Operation Cactus in 1988. When one of our ships, at that time our fleet was down to just 3 ships, um, in 1988 in Bombay, because the rest of the ships had gone into the Persian Gulf from the Western Fleet. I happened to be the fleet navigating officer at that time, I remember, when Operation Cactus was taking place. So the fleet commander, um, with these three or four ships, had gone into um, Oman, UAE, yes, Oman and UAE, 2 ports in UAE and 1 port in Oman. And came back. Uh, we came back from there. While we were there, we were monitoring what was happening. Uh, I think it was INS Godavari, which was coming back from uh, an overseas deployment to Australia. And after that, it was coming to Port Blair before heading back to Bombay, when it was diverted, asked to refuel and come at full speed to um, try and capture that merchant ship, whatever light its name was. It was some light, and where these rebels had taken the then president of Maldives and his cabinet hostage, and it was going towards Sri Lanka. Now, the international law is that when you enter the territorial waters of a third country, no other country in hot pursuit can enter there, even if these were criminals under international law.
Violence. Hmm. Hmm.
So this ship Godavari, along with another ship Betwa, which was coming out of Cochin, it was a training ship. They finally managed to stop because Godavari was carrying a seeking helicopter. It could have carried two at that time. It was carrying one, which first Godavari fired across the bows of this ship. When it didn't stop, then it came ahead of its bows. And with this coercive action, finally the ship stopped, and Godavari was able to send its seeking helicopter with commandos down with its. Those days we didn't have to carry Marcos. Our own people were trained in small arm firing, etc.
Uh-huh.
And and those people finally rescued the cabinet and held these criminals as prisoners. So the Chinese have been making forays everywhere, and you know what happened in the Maldives
Hmm.
um, recently, when the Chinese, under the last government, tried to acquire. They have already acquired one island, and they say that they'll create a tourist destination over there. So what I'm saying is that most countries in the Indian Ocean depend on the Indian Navy, and therefore most countries understand why we have these MOUs signed. We still have to obtain diplomatic clearance before a ship enters, but the advantage of a navy being slow compared to an air force is that you get 24 to 48 hours before you go into any country's port for replenishment and operational turnaround, you have enough time to get obtain diplomatic permissions.
I mean, I must, might I say, sir, thank you so much for this story. It actually puts a lot of things in perspective with regards to how, if I may, maritime, for the lack of a better word, for a not a very initiated person like me, games work, sir. I think these kind of stories are not known because a lot of these army stories, a lot of the air force stories are still known, but the naval stories are not known. That this kind of stuff actually happens on the high seas. So my last and final question to you to kind of stitch this subject up. We've spoken about how the Chinese would react in Haifa and this and that and the other. Strategically, at the larger level, sir. Of course, the Chinese have this whole string of pearls. We've got this necklace of diamonds. Uh, that strategic competition is obviously going to continue. Nobody's won anything. We might be at an advantage right now. Fair enough. Point taken. Uh, what is it that one the two parts of this question, so what is it that the Chinese can exploit, and two, uh, how do you see their outlook as far as the maritime strategic advantage that India would be gaining with these kind of moves?
Well, actually, to tell you a fact, China has already acquired far too many ports. Either just the management, starting with Gwadar. Do you know, by the way, when Gwadar Phase 1 was completed by the Chinese in 2008, it a Chinese company, was it CHCC or COHCC, whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
won the contract to replace Port of Singapore Authority, which is number one in the world in managing
Well,
ports. And the reason was very obvious to us, that how it happened, that the Pakistanis were obviously told by the Chinese to make sure that no ships are invited into Gwadar. In any case, it is located geographically in such a position that there was hardly any railroad connectivity to the rest of the country, which now the Chinese are making as part of its CPEC. And that also, by the way, is in doldrums when it
mm,
comes to Pakistan. Of the 62 billion, it came back to 46 billion. And after spending a lot of money on power transmission systems, etc., and a large part of phase two of Gwadar, the Chinese have suddenly stepped back now because they know Pakistan is struggling to get $3 billion from IMF under a lot of restrictions. How will it ever pay back? So the Chinese having um, already acquired management contracts in a lot of ports around the world and in this part of the world. Now they are making Lamu port in one East African country, whether it's Tanzania or wherever. They're spending a lot of money um, because those countries haven't got that kind of money to spend, even though it is a tri-nation project, I think. Mm, that it is a setback, there is no doubt. Both Haifa and the recent MOU with the Omanis for Dukum. But I think they have already got enough, more than they can chew at the moment, because their economy is not doing too well. A lot of retrenchment has taken place because of shutting down of certain industries. So they better start looking for employment opportunities within the country rather than expanding their strategic footprint
mm, mm.
elsewhere. Taking over ports is not just a money spinner. At times it becomes loss making, but it certainly is not generating employment for so much of manpower that China has, so much of its population that has been retrenched. So, in a way, it is all right for them at the moment till they revive their manufacturing shop floor and revive some of the shut down industries.
Hmm. I mean, it's you've it's interesting. I think you've brought out a very interesting point. that realism would actually play a larger role than the so-called bird in the bush. Uh,
Yes.
Somewhere down the line, the Chinese would have to get a bit realistic. But as we were having this wonderful discussion before we started recording this, that seems to be quite elusive for the Chinese at the moment, with looking at a very
So,
basic, realistic sort of a positioning in the world, sir. Sir, I must say it's always a learning experience talking to you, and trust you me, with the amount of little research I did around studying around articles, write-ups, and this and that, I could not get the picture that you've provided us, and I'm sure the viewers are going to feel the same way. You are getting popular and popular, sir, as within the Dev Talks audience, because they love the straight shooting that you've been doing, and I'm glad that I have the honor of actually talking to you more often. I'm looking forward for another one very soon, sir. Till then, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you, Adi. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.